Tom Cruise and Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 have come out of the gate with a nearly $240 million global haul. A little bit under what some projections were, but not to worry. This is typical fare for Mission Impossible films, which usually have a much longer shelf life than a lot of others. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And then, of course, Indiana Jones is looking at its final serious weekend before two new major competitors reduce its theater count even further next weekend, those coming by way of Barbie and Oppenheimer. But finally, the big surprise is the lingering power of Sound of Freedom, racking up another good weekend. We'll talk about that as well. This is your weekend box office update. Let's get into it. Renegade Online. Well, folks, welcome back. Another great day here at Valiant Renegade. It's good to see everybody out there once again. And if you are like one of the many folks watching this video, not yet subscribed to this channel, please take a moment and turn that little red subscribe button to gray. Hit that like button, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on the social medias, and of course, please do leave a comment before you head out the door today. Let's look at the total weekend chart here from the numbers. As you can see up top, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 at $56.2 million. That is, of course, the third, fourth, and fifth day of its open. The first 2 days opening on a Wednesday and Thursday, along with Tuesday previews. Sound of Freedom takes the second spot at $27 million, followed by Insidious The Red Door at $13 million, and Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny at $12 million. Of note, however, Elemental just seems to keep hanging in there. Not going to be quite as big a bomb as what we were thinking up front, but still a bomb nonetheless. This movie is going to be coming in way under its production budget when you count rentals coming back to Disney. They're still going to suffer a pretty significant loss on this, probably north of $100 million. But hats off to Elemental for maintaining a little bit of staying power ahead of what we thought it could do. But a lot of that staying power may erode next weekend when Mattel and Warner Brothers drop Barbie into theaters. So here's where we stand with Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny through its third weekend. You can see here domestic box office has risen to $145.3 million, and the international box office has climbed to $157 million for a total worldwide box office of $302 million. Now, of course, the problem with that is that this movie cost north of $300 million just to produce, with another estimated $100 million global P&A, that's marketing budget as estimated by Deadline magazine. Taking into account the roughly even-keeled breakdown in domestic versus international box office, about $150 million has made it back to the Walt Disney Company distribution system from these retail sales of global tickets. And that means that there's still about $250, $225 maybe in the hole on this film. I don't think it's going to get a whole lot better. As of right now, I would surmise that this movie is probably going to finish its run somewhere around $350 million. Too much competition out there now with Tom Cruise Mission Impossible, and then next weekend it gets even worse with Oppenheimer. These kinds of movies are going to consume the same type of demographic audiences that Indiana Jones otherwise would, and the scores and audience reaction for this film, frankly, just have not been that good. The exact opposite of what we're seeing from Mission Impossible. Next up on the chart that I want to discuss is Insidious The Red Door. Domestic box office now stands at $58 million, international at $64 for a global haul of $122 million. This movie is already a huge success at this point with a roughly $16 million budget, and this is why movie houses like Universal, Paramount, and Sony still want to do low-budget horror flicks. There's always a great built-in audience. It's a very low-risk, low financial risk endeavor when you're talking about making a movie that's between $10 and $20 million. Some come in even cheaper than that. And when you have a very popular franchise like Insidious, and then its sister franchise, The Conjuring, which they have The Nun 2 coming out later this year, that movie is probably going to do gangbusters as well, as big as the first one was. That's why studios love these kinds of films. The audiences love them. And you don't have to have a $200, $300, $400, $500 million box office to have a rousing success, hugely positive ROI or return on investment for the production of these films. Sure, they spend a lot of additional money on the marketing side of things, but by the time films like this get out of the theater and go into things like PVOD or premium video on demand for sales and rentals, and then later on physical media, and then after that, third-party licensing out to other streaming platforms, as is always the case with Sony since they don't have their own proprietary one, these Insidious movies really make bank. As a matter of fact, the Insidious movie here, The Red Door, is probably going to make more money on this movie than the Walt Disney Company will on anything they've put into theaters in the last 12 months. And no, that doesn't include Avatar, but then again, Avatar, as I continue to remind folks, is not an actual Disney production. They merely had distribution. We're talking about actual Disney-made movies here. Now let's talk about fan favorite Sound of Freedom. This is the movie that just will not quit. Now up at almost $85 to $86 million at the box office, which is stunning. This is a movie that they projected was going to do somewhere around 14 to 15 million in its opening 6 days. It came in sharply higher than that, and it just hasn't stopped since. The first weekend's box office performance back on July 7th, 19.6 million. That was on the 4th, 5th, and 6th day as it opened on the previous Tuesday, July 4th. And then you've got this weekend, the July 14th weekend, this 3-day weekend, $27 million. It's actually increased by 37%. This is what massive word of mouth and leg out really looks like. Now, of course, this is a bit of an exception to the rule because this is an outlier to be certain, but a film like this, again, that has a very small budget in that $14, $15, $16 million range, this is a massive hit for the producers of Sound of Freedom and for Angel Studios that distributed it. And what's truly astonishing is that it's doing this with an average theater count that is much lower than other big blockbusters out there, including Indiana Jones, Mission Impossible, even Insidious The Red Door. This film has had about 2,500 to 3,000 screens up until this weekend when they actually increased the number of screens available out there by about 300, considering the popularity of this film. And I'll take a break right here to once again thank Angel Studios and their generosity in sending me a private screener copy, as I wasn't able to get to the theater to see this last week ahead of the live show, and I wanted to be able to cover it and talk about it. It's a wonderful film, and I would encourage folks to go see it. I'll leave a link in the description of this video again if you want to go buy tickets via Angel Studios or use their pay-it-forward system to buy tickets for other folks. Now, if you want my final prediction on where The Sound of Freedom is going to wind up, I have no idea because it's very seldom that a movie performs like this. We're already at 86 million. We're in the third weekend. It's continuing to build momentum and add screens. This is a movie that's probably just going to hang around for the rest of the summer, racking up money. I would say at this point, it's probably going to get to 125, maybe 150 million, maybe more. It's just so hard to tell. And of course, as you can see, there's no international distribution. So for a movie to do what this is doing, that's something really special. But let's take a look here at Mission Impossible 7 Dead Reckoning Part 1, setting a 5-day U.S. opening franchise record with $80 million. Now, Paramount Studios itself is calling the number at 235 million as a global open through the end of the first weekend. I suspect there's a better than average chance that that number is going to be slightly higher once the actual figures come in. These movies, again, the Mission Impossible movies, kind of like Top Gun, there's a lot of walk-up traffic to this, a lot of word-of-mouth walk-up traffic. This does not have huge pre-sales or online sales to the tune that something like a Marvel film will have, so it makes it a little bit more difficult to track the reaction to this film. And that mostly has to do with the fact that the audience for this, as we've discussed on a number of occasions, does tend to skew older. Looking at the domestic box office numbers on this movie with a 5-day opening, and you think, $80 million, that's not that great. Indiana Jones had a 3-day opening of around $60 million, so why is this that much better? As I've reminded folks again and again with these Mission Impossible movies, the real power here is the international box office. They've always come in about twice as high as the domestic side has, and these movies tend to leg out. Matter of fact, Mission Impossible Fallout, the last entry back in 2018, legged out to well over a 3x from its biggest opening weekend. So here from Anthony D'Alessandro's article on Deadline, quote, as we already told you, even though Dead Reckoning's 5-day is in the vicinity of older-leaning Disney Lucasfilm finale Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, a film that we declared as a complete box office upset in regards to its $300 million production cost, Mission Impossible sequel is a different beast, as it has great reviews, 96 certified fresh, and excellent audience scores with A from CinemaScore, 5 stars post-track to leg it out, especially overseas. Dial of Destiny does not have that momentum, and you can clearly see it in the global opening here for Dead Reckoning. More to the point, Dial of Destiny's global running stands at $302 million through 3 weeks, and the Cruise sequel in its first 5 days is just $67 million shy of that. On a like-for-like basis, including the international box, excluding China, is $129.6 million. That's 15% ahead of Fallout from 2018, making it the biggest opening for the franchise. China, however, is at $25.4 million, which is 66% below Mission Impossible Fallout, which had a $74 million opening weekend in China. Pin that to the country turning its back on Hollywood fare post-pandemic. And that's very true. We have seen a much softer Chinese box office for a lot of films, and some, of course, way more so than others. But by comparison, a $25 million opening weekend for Dead Reckoning in China versus about a $2 to $3 million Chinese open for Indiana Jones and The Little Mermaid as well. So if we take this data at face value and just give it what is fairly common for Mission Impossible with a 3x set of legs, that's going to put this movie easily over $700 million to conclude its run, hopefully closer to $800 million, if not slightly higher. And yes, there is competition coming in next weekend from Oppenheimer, but then again, we don't know how long that movie is going to leg out from there. It's also a 3-hour runtime, even a little bit longer than what Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning is. And yes, it will consume a lot of the IMAX, actually all of the IMAX branded screens, but not all of the premium large format or PLF screens. And one of the things that we've heard repeated a lot in the box office trades as they've tracked this is that they think some of the reason that the numbers that have come in a little bit lower on the opening weekend for Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning versus what they expected is the notion that audiences are waiting to get into PLFs, or more specifically IMAX screens, to see this film versus just buying a ticket for a regular screen. That is going to also, if true, push the leg out on this movie even a little bit better than we think now. But given this film's opening weekend, I think a roughly $250 million domestic box office, if not a little bit higher, hopefully another $500 to $600 on the international side, even with China being a bit soft as it is. And don't forget, one of the reasons that the movie didn't have an even bigger opening this weekend globally than it did is because, once again, Japan delayed a release of an American film. Japan is not going to open this movie until next weekend. And Japan is a huge Tom Cruise market. Don't believe me? Just look at the nearly $100 million it racked in for Top Gun Maverick. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Where do you think these movies are going? Where do you think Sound of Freedom and Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning are going to leg out? How much competition do you think they're going to get next weekend from Barbie and Oppenheimer? Certainly it'll be a good bit, but I think Mission Impossible is going to surprise in its second weekend. And as I said last weekend, I think that opening weekend for Oppenheimer and Barbie, and with Mission Impossible in the mix, and with Sound of Freedom still running strong, that could be one of the biggest weekends at box offices all year long. Make sure you leave your thoughts in the comments below, hit that like and subscribe, and until next time, take care.